but I do not want to talk after my wife sings ever again, whoever did this. Sometimes Jesus said things that are just impossible to do. Let not your heart be troubled. How? Let not your heart be troubled. Trust in God, trust also in me. I told my son Travis, who's also a minister, if I can't get through this, you're up. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I am going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back, and I will take you to be with me, that where I am, you may be also. You know the way, and you know the place that I'm going. And Thomas said, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? And then Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And then this great gift, he says. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not the peace that the world gives, but mine. And that's the answer to the first part. Because he says again, do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. You stand and sing, Precious Lord, take my hand. Who can separate us from the love of Christ? Can tribulation or distress or persecution or famine, nakedness or peril or sword. No. And all of these things, we are more than conquerors through the one who loves us. We are sure that neither death nor life, angels or principalities, anything present, anything to come, no power, no height, no depth, anything else in all of creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. And to that we say thanks be to God.
A number of years ago, at the conclusion of one of Grant's sermons, he broke into an a cappella solo, and he was singing, "Come Home, It's Supper Time." And Robin told me at the time she wanted a recording of that, because I was taping services at that time, because she said, "I want that to be played at my funeral." Therefore, this is what we're going to hear. Grant Montgomery sing.
The Goodwin family sang a song a long time ago called Come Home, It's Supper Time. Long ago, when just a boy in childhood, I used to play till evening shadows come. Then winding down an old familiar pathway, I heard my mother call that set of sun. Come home, it's supper time. The shadows lengthen fast. Come home, it's supper time. We're going home at last. In visions now I see her standing yonder. Her old familiar voice I hear once more. The banquet's ready up here in heaven. It's supper time up on this golden shore. Come home, it's supper time. The shadows lengthen fast. Come home, it's supper time. We're going home at last.
Telling my mom and dad no doesn't work out very well. I've tried. He retired from First Church over in Hamilton, asked me to preach his retirement sermon. I said no. I did. He retired again from here, asked me to preach the same sermon. I said no. I did. It was the same sermon. And when he called and he told me that Robin had passed away, he asked if I would do the service, and I said no. And here I stand, but I have a plan. I think this is the last time he's ever going to ask me to do anything. You see, because this is how it went. I said, well, Dad, I'm not sure I can do it. And he said, well, I can't, so you have to. I said, no, you have a grandson. And no, we want you to do it. But there's things we don't want you to say. Well, the joke's on you, dude. Because if I'm serious about this today, I'm going to have a hard time getting through it. I'm going to try. The last time I stood in the sanctuary and talked with you folks, remember, there was a lot of tears and sadness because Mom and Dad were retiring and folks didn't want them to go by and large. There were also congratulations and a taste of joy that they had reached that time where they could take for themselves, but it was a unique, sad, and joyous moment. Today is another such uniquely grief-stricken but also joyous moment, because the story of my sister's life is one of redemption and reconciliation. And in that there is a great spice of divine joy. There are certain things that I need to believe, or I couldn't say that. First, I believe that there is something about you that is eternal. Something about you that is divinely created and that lives forever, and I don't care what you call it, but it's more important than the corpuscles, the blood, the sinew, the synapses, and all the chemicals and organs that make you up. There's something permanent. I believe in that. I also believe in God. And I don't mean some Hollywood version of a benevolent, gray-bearded old person who passes out fortune cookies and works at the soup kitchen. I'm talking about a divine, interactive, enthusiastic creator who is deeply interested in what you do with your life, the decisions you make, and the path you choose. That's the God I believe in. I believe in a God who gave us freedom of choice. That you get to wake up and decide what you're going to be and what you're going to do today. That your path is not set in iron or stone, and that you get to carve a new path for yourselves based on your faith and your identity that you choose. And last, I spent a lot more years training to be a psychologist and a psychotherapist than I did training to be a minister and a theologian. And I have a deep interest in how human beings choose their own identities. Every one of us tries to find our place and our strength. And there are those moments in your life when you remember you stood up and chose to be something or someone and would not be moved. Those were the moments of your strength choosing and your identity forming. Those moments help forge what lays ahead. You choose the people who will populate your life, the activities that will fill your days. You choose who you love. Robin, like the rest of us, sought her strength, found her identity, and wrestled with her choices, just like we're going to have to do this afternoon, tomorrow, and the day after. Some of them were good, some weren't. So I'm going to ask you today to be a participant in this memorial, not just a listener. I read an article that was brilliantly done. It's 170 years old. The man wrote, "I went to a funeral today, and for the first time in my life, I sat in a funeral parlor and was not just an attendee, I was a participant. I heard about every decision the deceased made and realized I had to make one just like it. I heard about every high point, every victory, every low point, every setback. And I realized I had those high points, I had those low points, those victories and those setbacks. I heard about his life and how his heart had on one occasion been deeply broken and later had been healed. And I realized my hopes had also been shattered, and I was looking for healing that very day. I was not just hearing about someone's life," he said. "I was reviewing my own. I left the funeral not filled with tears, but filled with hope that the challenges coming in my life will be better handled because today I participated in a memorial that reminded me of my choices." That's my challenge to you today. To participate in Robin's journey. and may it visit upon you strength for your own. Where do you find your strength? That's my first question to you. Where do you find your strength? When I was 9 years old, I had been listening to my father tell the stories of West Virginia my whole life. And how he would take a blanket, a potato, a can of beans, and a match and go into the hills and survive. Now, it's probably true. But I'd heard about it and I believed it. So I went to my dad and I said, I was 9, remember. I said, Dad, I want to sleep out. I want to go out in the woods, sleep out by myself, like you did. And he surprised me because he said, okay. Well, it was different in 1960 than it is now. Maybe you wouldn't do that now, but he let me do that then. And so I was gathering my stuff together when Robin grabbed her pillow and her blanket, went up to my parents and said, I want to go too. And I thought, that ruins everything. You can't let her do that. What great adventure am I going to have with her along with me? They said, okay. So off we trooped. Now, we didn't go that far, and it wasn't that deep, but for us, it was a great adventure. What I remember so vividly is we made our little fire, and we had our little food, and then she made a nest and laid her blanket down and curled up and went to sleep and slept the whole stinking night. All night. Me, I was up all night, checking, looking around, hearing every noise. She was sound asleep. Every so often we'd talk about that night. And I said, how could you? You're 6. How could you do that? And she said, I felt safe. Because you were there. I never told her how I was scared all night. But she felt safe. Remember that. She was born with a streak of iron in her like you were. But you have to find those moments to sharpen that iron and turn it into the tool that builds that strength so that you can do the things you need to do. She started writing me letters in 1969. I kept them all. I have every letter she ever wrote to me. Now, that's not a big deal because I have every letter anybody ever wrote to me. I have all the letters from my 8th grade girlfriends right through to today. Her file is thicker than the others because she wrote a lot. I spent a couple days reading them all, and I was thrilled to hear her stories of how she was finding herself in high school. You know how dangerous high school is? Yeah. And it's a place where you can have your identity threatened, challenged, snubbed, mocked, or built up. My sister was beautiful. She had a great sense of humor. She was popular, but she was still a little insecure in the 9th grade when she made the JV cheerleading squad. And she wrote to me and said, the JV cheerleading squad has to practice with the senior squad, and they pick on us and call us names and treat us. It's just awful. I hate it. After a basketball game, she got on the bus. She and her friend Tina sat down, and she's writing all this in this long 5-page letter. And this captain of the varsity cheerleader team walked in and said, you have to move. Why? I don't want you there. There's plenty of room. You have to move, or I'm going to make you walk. Robin said after all those weeks of persecution, she had had enough. She stood up, she looked that captain of the varsity cheerleader squad in the eye, and she said, shut up and sit down. And she started to mouth back, this captain did, and Robin said she looked her in the eye and yelled, shut up and sit down. And she did. I have 5 pages describing that event. You got a half a page. What happened? The best part of the letter came at the end when she said, I am not afraid of her anymore. And Monday's practice is going to be better. That's a great letter. There are times in your life when you've had to have those moments when you stood up and finally confronted the things that attack you with the strength that you need for tomorrow's decision. And what did she do with that strength that she was discovering? How did she use it? Because that's the next decision you have to make, you who are participating in this memorial. I have letters from her about the church youth group. All the things they were going to do, including going to a Patriots football game, an overnight, a trip, a camp out, a hayride, bowling. But the last half of the last page, she says, the thing that makes me most happy is that the kids in the youth group are serious about their religion and they listen to the devotion. That's not a common letter for a sophomore in high school. The seeds of the divine were being planted in there somewhere. She wrote to me that she had read the book, The Cross and the Switchblade. You may be familiar with that. It's by David Wilkerson. He started a ministry to inner city youth in New York. She met David Wilkerson, according to my father, and she said that she had decided she wanted to become someone who works with those in need. And she made that decision following a sermon. And she wrote to me about the sermon. She said, I heard Everett Mills preach about this camp he started for underprivileged kids. And although he's not much of a preacher, and he almost cried, he was so nervous. It touched me, and I know what I want to do. Back then, the seeds of the divine were being nurtured in her life. Now, of course, this is where I get into trouble. Her letters also included the everyday run-of-the-mill teenage girl stuff. All of the breakups, all the family stuff, all the who's dating who, and why was it that when I left my football powerhouse academy in New England, they didn't win a game for the next year. That really bothered her because she was a cheerleader. So I called my parents and I said, listen to some of these stories. And I told them a few. And Dad responded by saying, well, you can't say that. So I'm not going to. But if you get me later, Robin was someone who loved the things that she did, and she wrote about them in great volume. She criticized me deeply for the way I treated my girlfriend that I left behind in high school. She loved her cheerleading. She loved to dance. She wrote about dancing often. In fact, and this is just an aside, it's not part of the sermon, I'm sorry, but I can't help it. She was so into dancing that there was a show on in the 70s where people would go to Hollywood and dance in a competition. And Toledo, where she lived at the time, sent a couple. And they were so bad, Robin was angry. Because she said, and I quote from one of her letters, it will make the rest of the world think that's how Toledo dances. And I am better than that. Her plans to help people stayed true, that spark of the divine. She wanted to be a nurse, she wanted to be a psychologist, and she talked about all those kinds of things. And a series of letters in the mid-70s really touched me because she said, look, you've been married for 3 years, what's it like? What's it like to be married? Is it better than dating? Yes. No. I don't know. What are you asking me? She wrote back, I just want to be ready. I want to know what it's like. I mean, how do you feel? Did your idea of marriage change now? Are you as for it as you once were? She wrote the same kind of letters to me in 1977 and 78 about, we'd had a baby, and she wanted to know, what's that like? I'm too tired to write. Don't ask. That didn't help. In response to all those letters, I don't think this had anything to do with it, but she got a dog, a black lab named Chief. She loved that dog. She never got over loving animals, as Marcus attests. I have several letters when all I hear about is how he loves to swim and fetch, but the best part, she said, is I have a dog who, when I sit down, he will sit down with me and cuddle. That's the best part of having a dog, which tells you a lot about Robin. But something did change. And honesty demands that we recognize something changed. She still had her strength, she was still making decisions, but her focus shifted. And she abandoned much of what had been the iron in her soul and went a different path. She wrote to me her last letter in 1980. And in it she said that she was going down a new path. She was recasting herself in a new light. And she knew I didn't like it. But she didn't want me to interfere. It's a difficult time, that which followed. We will not dwell on it other than to say there was a great distance created. And the strength that she had used to bind us together now was not. Instead, it was a distance-creating tool. Such is the power of decision-making. Which brings me to something else that I believe in. Grace, mercy, and reconciliation. Like the prodigal son, Robin came to a point where she wanted to come home. She found her way home. She looked for an anchor. And it drew her back to her faith, to her family, and to a new foundation of relationship with you. I first want to compliment my mom and dad because they helped plant those seeds that were divine in my sister. And when she needed to come back to a place of strength, she came home to the faith that my parents had taught her and to the home where they kept the door open. She would not have found her way back without you. But that's what happened.